Welcome to the Archive for Sexology. Among many other things, we also offer a free online curriculum in sexual health. I'm its author, Erwin Haberle. Right now, I want to introduce you to a subject covered in our course number 6, sexual minorities. The term sexual minorities is relatively new. It was coined in analogy to older concepts of certain social groups that were formerly oppressed in some countries, but are now being recognized as deserving equal rights. The United Nations, for example, did this in 1992 for national, ethnic, religious, and linguistic minorities. A minority in this sense is not just any small group, because many small groups of people, like musical child prodigies or mathematical geniuses, are not called minorities. On the other hand, some very large groups, indeed even statistical majorities, like the black citizens of Africa under apartheid, or women in many countries all over the world, have occasionally claimed the status of minorities for themselves. It seems, therefore, that the defining element in the concept of a social minority is some form of negative discrimination, a lack of power. However, as long as the lack of power is total, no minority can constitute itself. They can form a minority only when they make common cause with others, present themselves to the public as a group, and thus become a social force, at least potentially. In other words, minorities are groups of oppressed individuals who, on the basis of some common interest, have developed some solidarity with each other, and thus have gained a certain power, even if it still remains largely symbolic. Limited as this initial power may be, it nevertheless allows them and others to demand an end to their oppression. We are dealing, therefore, with a paradox. The oppressed need at least a little power in order to demonstrate their unjustified lack of power. However, their ultimate goal, and this is a second paradox, is to join a more tolerant majority as normal citizens and thus to lose their minority status. Even so, they may still cultivate their minority culture because it is then generally perceived as non-threatening and folkloristic. Here is an illustration that may help in understanding this social mechanism. First, the picture shows you how isolated, sexually oppressed individuals develop some solidarity and organize themselves. They are here colored yellow. As a newly organized minority, C, they try to take their place next to officially recognized national, ethnic, religious, and linguistic minorities, A, B, D, and E, here colored blue, green, orange, and red. The new sexual minority shares the same goal with the others: recognition with equal rights as fully accepted members of society. Finally, once accepted, the minorities dissolve and blend into the multicolored spectrum of the general population. Some of them retain and display their typical customs, but these now assume a non-controversial, quasi-folkloristic character. Thus, sexual minorities follow the patterns of all other minorities. First oppressed, then grudgingly tolerated up to a point. Finally, given equal rights, they end up fully integrated and then keep cultivating their own lifestyle. thus adding a new color to the cultural spectrum of their societies. A good example of this process can be studied in the American city of San Francisco. This city on the Pacific coast had, since the days of the gold rush in the mid-19th century, harbored people from every ethnic and religious background. As a city of minorities, it also had a reputation of social tolerance. However, this tolerance had never extended to its Chinese immigrants, who suffered all kinds of discrimination. Indeed, to some extent, this was at times also true of the Japanese and the Irish, the Italians and the Mexicans. However, in the course of time, the city's ethnic minorities began to demonstrate their presence and voting power in annual parades, beginning with the Chinese New Year in February and ending with the Italian Columbus Day in October. In fact, almost every month had such a parade, except June. There was also a great deal of intolerance toward homosexual men in San Francisco. In fact, well into the 1960s, gay bars were raided by the police and their patrons arrested. After all, male homosexual contact was then a serious crime in California. This was the situation when, in June 1969, a police raid on a gay bar in New York's Christopher Street met resistance and caused violent protests. Now, San Francisco's gay and lesbian community saw a welcome opportunity, since the month of June still happened to be free. They used it for a gay parade, thus taking advantage of an already existing pattern to achieve the same ends. The gay parade simply and very neatly fit into the gap between the already established parades and eventually proved successful beyond all expectations. Once the mayor and other politicians saw the enormous numbers of potential voters, they joined the parade as they had always joined the others. Soon, the first gay member of the city council was elected. The California law against male homosexual contact was repealed, and the diagnosis of homosexuality as an illness was removed from the Diagnostic Handbook of American Psychiatrists. Thus, San Francisco's gays and lesbians were set on the path to eventual full social acceptance. The example of San Francisco is instructive for another reason. The gay parade has participants from all of the city's ethnic minorities: Chinese, Irish, Japanese, Mexican, Filipino, Italian, and many more. This shows that a person can be a member of several minorities at the same time. For example, a member of the Chinese American minority can also be a Buddhist and therefore belong to a religious minority. In addition, he may speak and read only Chinese and thus be part of a linguistic minority. Moreover, he may be confined to a wheelchair and thus belong to the minority of the physically disabled. Finally, as a gay person, he may belong to a sexual minority. Actually, an individual may belong to several sexual minorities simultaneously, and some of these may have gained more social acceptance than the others. There are, for instance, gay transvestites, bisexual swingers, and lesbian sadomasochistic fetishists. If these also happen to belong to some ethnic, religious, and linguistic minority, the picture becomes even more complicated. Not all minorities suffer the same kinds and degrees of discrimination. And this raises the question, which minority membership will have which consequences for which individual in which situation? Obviously, different occasions will bring different memberships into focus. A wheelchair-bound lesbian Chinese American may join not only the Chinese New Year's parade in February, but also the gay parade in June, and at some other time may participate in a political demonstration demanding more rights for the disabled. As this example illustrates, no minority status can ever define the whole person. Attaching a minority label to someone may sometimes be helpful and even unavoidable, but it can also be quite misleading. This is equally true when individuals label themselves. Human life is too complex for easy categorizations, especially in the sphere of human sexuality. We are always in danger of stereotyping people and becoming blind to the other more important aspects of their character. However, failing to see them as unique, complete personalities in their own right is both unfair and unrealistic. In reality, there are no gays, fetishists, or sadomasochists. They are only concrete individuals who show their own specific sexual behaviors under specific conditions. But this tells us little or nothing about the rest of their lives. Such labels have a very limited use and are never adequate or even appropriate for the description of a human being. Every woman and every man is always more than a member of a minority.